the word esoteric, as most of you are aware, means interior or hidden. At least that's my definition of it. And therefore, in many circles, in our country and in Britain too, attaches the word esoteric or even esoteric tradition to certain teachings which do not belong to, or maybe even relate particularly happily to the mainstream traditions. And so that is just the plain meaning of esoteric and of esoteric tradition. And what you need to keep in mind is that it would seem from the available evidence, that it's a brown hat. I thought it was a black hat. It was going to be the black hat Lama thing. There is such a thing because the chief Lama of one of the great Tibetan orders has a ceremonial black hat which he only wears occasionally. And it's a great big ceremony which is a lot of fun to watch when a bunch of lamas are there. This is actually the Karmapa. And the Karmapa sits on the throne, and then they come up and bring him a black hat. And he looks at it, and first he doesn't want anything to do with it. And then they come again, and finally he puts it on, and then there is great rejoicing, and the ceremony goes on. Well, every tradition has its own ceremonies. In any event, what we are dealing with here is the fact that even within religious or spiritual bodies which stand quite sturdily on their own feet, there are yet others who might be considered in comparison to them as esoteric. So the limit of esotericism, or for that matter of exotericism, there is really no limit, because every spiritual data, hello there, Peter, every spiritual data always has an additional level of profundity. The unfortunate fact about this that it not only has an additional element of profundity, but it also has its shallow points, which are not worth considering too much. So every kind of spiritual movement, any kind of spiritual tradition that you may encounter may have abundant interest for us, or on the other hand it may have very little interest. And this is something that we have to decide. And on the elements of very little interest, I will just say one thing, and that is that there are numerous, perhaps even innumerable duplications of teachings, of imagery, of rituals, of all kinds of things that are floating out in the public and which may demand the title of esoteric, or you might deny that they are esoteric and then they would count as exoteric. So we have to make our own decisions as to what we may encounter, whether in the form of printed literature or in spoken word like tonight. Okay, and then make the decision on that basis as to whether we consider this esoteric or not. In fact, inasmuch as we are now very, very close to the centenary mark of the century, we might say that almost anything along certain lines that comes our ways might either qualify as esoteric or as exoteric, owing to various circumstances, including the times when it may have been proclaimed and so forth. So that is one important issue. The other one is, of course, that pretty much all spiritual teachings, the sort of teachings that aspire to being of a religious or quasi-religious nature, being of the nature of stimulating the ordinarily hidden, concealed faculties and talents of human nature, may be called either esoteric or exoteric. But to not get completely lost here in the definitions, one needs to keep in mind that as far as we can tell, since the world began, there were always people who adhered to an exoteric, which means an outward directed teaching and activity, and others which were inward directed and inwardly searching, which can be called esoteric. So the best thing is not to lose too much time and energy on these definitions, because there is actually a fairly easy way of distinguishing these two. And what is that? Anything that pertains to the life, to the activities of the human being that are directed outward, that are focused outward from his own selfhood, may be called exoteric. And all of those that are focused on the individual, and then the individual's nature, psychic, and perhaps also physical, that may be called exoteric. So we have an exoteric and an esoteric aspect to almost any teachings which pertain to the development and of the human being inwardly. So we might even say, since the end of the 19th century, which is when all kinds of interesting things in this regard took place. For instance, on the very first day of the 20th century was published Sigmund Freud's book on dreams. And whatever we wish to say in psychological terms, even though he is, let's say, he may be accused, Sigmund Freud may be accused of having started something of an exoteric nature, namely in its motivational power being largely grounded in sexuality. At the same time, he also had interests and psychological insight and doctrines which are definitely of a deeply interior nature. We also could ascertain at the same time that as we look at the psychoanalytic movement, the depth psychological movement as it is often called, practically every school of it, whether they are Jungian or Freudian or Adlerian or whatever the case may be, would have within itself certain elements that would qualify as esoteric and others that would qualify as exoteric. And this is very largely due to human nature, because we, each and every one of us here in this room and all over the world, have a side, a aggregate of insights into our psyche, into our soul, which may be called exoteric, and others which are not. So before we pass a judgment over any group of people or churches or whatever they may be, as to whether they qualify as esoteric or exoteric, it requires a certain amount of investigation in depth. As I have sometimes mentioned in the past, that among my past accomplishments or past activities, there was a period of almost 2 years when I worked technically for Doubleday Publisher in order to collaborate and assist one of their champion authors, Mr. Irving Stone, the great historical novelist. If you keep looking at books and even looking at motion pictures, you will find a heck of a lot of them signed as Irving Stone. This was a very, very talented man. But he couldn't do everything himself, and I got in when he was finishing the writing of the book that he wrote. You know, he was his activities comprised mostly biographical novels, historical novels, and therefore, written about various historical figures that are no longer with us or were at that time. And so there also we have to look as to what might qualify as esoteric or even in part esoteric, and what could be considered purely exoteric. And that's up to each and every one of us to judge. All right, now with that little introduction there, let us say that there is now, and there certainly has been for hundreds of years, I wouldn't venture a guess how many hundreds of years, or even how many thousands of years. There has been a movement of the spiritual, within the spiritual search of people, which could be called esoteric, as contrasted with the other one, which was probably practiced by mostly individuals of a more extroverted nature, which could be called exoteric. And now what I intended to do this evening, and my good intentions in this regard often misfire or backfire, was to try to sort out, at least in a superficial way, what ideologies, what movements, what literature in our world qualifies as esoteric, and then see as to how these ideas, ideologies, movements, how they are likely to fare after we are no longer here, in all likelihood, at least if the we includes a 94-year-old myself, and so to look forward to these potential changes that may come in the future may be of considerable value to us. And at the same time, we may need to keep in mind that the strictly exoteric, that is mostly outward focused spiritual and intellectual movements may be looked at, and as the result of our investigation we might find out that they either still have a great future, or that their future is gone. As the old joke had it, that let's see, which one was that? I know so many jokes that I can't remember them. But let us say as the old verse, Didi has it, that be not concerned with the future. The future, the present is all thou hast. The future will soon be present. The present will soon be past. Which is just a nice little ditty to remember, and maybe to appear important, like lecturers do and so forth, to other people. But it contains a profound truth. If you look into occult or esoterically flavored literature from the past, you will find that a considerable portion of that literature was either primarily focused on or moving to a focus on what? The future. People were, as the Hollywood prophet Criswell, whom some of you may have had the mildly dubious fortune to meet. I did, because I lived here around that time, and he had several very forceful television programs every day. One couldn't escape Criswell if one wanted to, And Chrysler had had the saying also that we are all interested in the future, because that is where you and I are going to spend the rest of our life. He had a very nice and very sort of portentous way of talking, and this of course added to his prestige. And I even know someone who is probably on his way from Vienna at the present time, my cousin Roy Charles Kroom, who by now is a very prolific writer. Only the books that he wrote and gave to me that I have piled up with my other books are somewhere around a dozen. The man has been writing for a long time. That he and his family, when they moved here from New York, sometimes I think it would have been sort of in the late 1950s and early 60s, had always been exposed to Chrysler by a simple fact that they lived in Chrysler's house over on Las Palmas Avenue between Hollywood Boulevard and Sunset, a little street. And therefore he and his family were exposed to a lot of interesting and weird happenings with Mr. Chrysler. In any event, now what I'm trying to pull together somehow this evening is what one may determine that something, a tradition or a teaching or a practice is of an esoteric nature, so that we can see where we can trace these back, and also as to how they, even more importantly, how these and similar ideologies, movements would fare in the future. And that is not as easy a task as one might imagine. But let us say, as Krishna just said, through my mouth, we are all interested in the future. And why is that? Because the future, at least a certain extent, and not all of it, but in certain time span, the future is not an abstract commodity, but it is something that we will participate in. In a sense, one might say, with a little exaggeration, that we are our future. Because whatever future we may undergo, may suffer, we might even say, that is ours, although various influences may have come in order to make that more personal or more dramatic. Now, that being the case, we have at the present time a good many associations of people who, and these associations are of an unusual character and usual and perennial in their reach. So in other words, these schools of thought, or whatever you may call them, have an enduring power, and they also promised to be there probably a considerable time after our own time. Now, that being the case, it would be the best thing for me to get off my high horse of abstractions and come a little bit down to tax, so to say, although you don't want to get tax into you. And I don't mean the Internal Revenue Service, but the other. And so we might say that there are two vast groups, and they are, for the most part, quite different from each other. And some of them have been here for a very long time, and others haven't. And some of these are what we might call exoteric, referring to the outer situations of humans, and others are esoteric, or more hidden nature. Now, as to the openly available exoteric, we might say that there is no need for us to talk about that or to discuss that, because merely looking into the public life, merely looking into what is in the media, so-called, we will find there the exoteric data. Now, what they amount to, they're either available or, let's say, they promise to be available to everyone, including ourselves, and this promised and often fulfilled generality, general availability, makes them exoteric. That is true of the great religions of the world, because you don't have to exert yourself in some extraordinary fashion in order to join one of the exoteric, that is primarily outwardly focused religious groups, including the great big vast ones who are found practically everywhere in the world: Christianity, Islam, and a few others. And then there are esoteric movements which in their entire approach are not focused so much on the proselytizing, and the proselyte is someone who is converted, on proselytizing people to their point of view, but who are of different inclinations. And so we will find both exoteric and esoteric. This, to a certain extent, but not entirely, is also connected with another set of psychological data, which certainly Jung recognized and some others, which implies that there are people who are outer directed, their principal focus is in the outside world, and those who are inner directed, in which case they tend to be focused on their interior life and valuing their interior life probably higher than anything else. And that they would qualify as exoteric and esoteric. Now, let's take a look. the world's great religions are, I would say, to a major extent, exoteric. Why is that so? Because the personality types of humans fall in line with that. They are also out-of-directed, primarily interested in the world as it's revealed to them by their senses, and so we might say that the entire movement has a predominantly exoteric thrust. On the other hand, even among the religious denominations that are primarily exoteric, there will be found some people who are by temperament, by their character, esoteric in direction. And when one converses with a number of people, maybe simultaneously at some convocational meeting or so forth, you will be able to pick these out. Their conversation will not be overwhelmingly powerful, but on the other hand, if you listen to them closely, their insights are usually more powerful. And so it's a matter of sorting this out as to whether you are in the company of exoteric or esoterically inclined people is not all that difficult. For instance, I would suggest that if you want to determine how many people right now in this room are of esoteric inclination, I would say that just about everybody who is here. Why? Because this is an esoteric forum. Now, I don't mean the physical building was necessarily started that way, because we are informed that this building, which is now more than 100 years old, was built as a silent movie theater in the early years of the motion picture industry. You can even, you look very close, you can even see two covered up openings in the wall, left and right to the clock, which were the projectionist openings. So the projectionist was hidden in a little closet behind it, and he would be able to project the film, which was over there, more or less, on the stages, that was later on. And so that is not the reason why, at the present time, more esotericists will come through that door than esotericists. Because the very method, and I certainly not want to put down the motion picture industry. I have done some little work in that myself. I've known a lot of people in past years at Columbia Studios and things like that. So I have a considerable respect for the motion picture industry. But we need to keep in mind that in a purely technical sense, the motion picture industry is the very image of extroversion. Why? Because it works and has worked, of course now there are more other methods, on projection. when something is here, and then you have found modalities whereby to project it over there, by then it increases in its size and so forth, then you have engaged in what psychologically we all do very frequently, and that is to project some content of our own minds, of our own consciousness, or maybe on our unconscious, outside of ourselves, and then deal with it as if it were belonging to someone else, although it came from us. The whole issue, for instance, of propaganda, which is a Latin word meaning that which is to be put forth, propagated. So the whole issue of propaganda has to do with the taking of consciousness or unconscious context of our psyche and putting it out in some fashion for us and probably others to see by projecting it outside of ourselves. And then it appears as if it is out there, but it really originated in here. And that's a very large portion of our conversations, of many things that we do. So we put them out there. On the other hand, we also need to keep in mind that we will not have, and these are mostly psychological terms, we will not have the same effect when projecting the internal content of our mind, of our psyche outside, as we will be able to establish a connection, perhaps, between when we project the content of our psyche on someone else, then a relationship has arisen. A fraternity has been started. A political party has come into existence because we practice or perhaps pretend that we have managed to put what is within ourselves out there. And then we feel that we have a good relationship with this other person because psychically we have recognized them as being our kin, let us say, or being mostly related to ourselves. So all these things exist, but we need to somehow find our way through them and come to recognize that our inquiry was directed and is directed to esoteric matters. And that's what we are trying to take a look at. And why is that so? Because when we allow our minds to become involved with esoteric matters, esoteric teachings, esoteric literature, esoteric theater, motion picture, whatever, then we have associated ourselves with something that has a bearing on the external world. And that is also very important to remember, because our likes and dislikes, and perhaps even more our loves and hatreds, which is of more intensified degree, all of these are dependent on our ability to project. I was a child, and then what was I after I'm a child? Well, I was an adolescent and eventually an adult. In Europe at the time when the ideology that called itself National Socialism, the first two letters in German are A, N, A, Z, I, Nationalsozialismus, were very powerful and very frequent. And yet, only those people who had the internal fortitude and the internal defenses not to be taken in by this particular propaganda, but realizing that the propaganda in turn has in its own background a desire to persuade and to dominate. And that's exactly what German National Socialism did, and which was both its advantage and its defect, and eventually ended in a tremendous defeat. So once again we have to look. On the other hand, let's just pick a feature of esoteric lore or esoteric teaching, such as the one which is particularly close to some of us, because for many, many years, and now too, the Theosophical Society, founded in New York City in 1875 by Madame Blavatsky, Colonel Olcott, and their associates, had become virtually the embodiment of esotericism as it was propagated and eventually took more and more manifestations in the 19th century. So we have a connection with some of these matters. And there too, I have been and I am a long-time member of the Theosophical Society. Sometimes my fellow members remind me that I have been a member for 70 years, 80 years, because I began to be interested in these matters when I was in secondary school, and that is where I also learned about Gnosticism and other esoteric matters that I'm interested in. So we have possibilities in our lifetime to become associated with the esoteric. But we have to be careful that in so doing we don't exchange, let's say, maybe one unsatisfactory way to live, or one unsatisfactory life plan for another. But that we all, when we are little babies, our eyes open up and we see a baby's cosmology, and we form our own idea, our own primitive idea of what the world is like. Then as time goes on, we find out, well, no, I was wrong in this respect, I was wrong in that respect. And you narrow down the focus of your interest and your projection on people who are probably more deserving of your feeling a kinship with them than the others. And that is all of which has a lot to do with how people begin to look at the world. Now, looking at the world is the expression to which I was leading up to, and I'm sure that you didn't realize that I was leading up to anything, but I was. And what I meant by that there are circumstances, there are data, facts, and other kinds of data, emotionally charged data and so forth, which are present and sometimes in larger numbers or sometimes in less numbers in the world. And that these in turn are the ones that we seek out. If we seek them out, the reason that we are doing that is because in them, externally or internally, there are certain factors, there are certain data which we inwardly resonate with. In other words, the inner man answers to the outer man, or the inner woman to the outer woman. And thereby, that particular subject grows in influence in humanity. Now, let's say I was 13 years old when the Russians conquered my country, Hungary, but let's say right at that time and even before, I became, at that tender age, in my teens, I became aware of the fact that most people believe bad things. That most people have a strong tendency to be drawn to ideas which are not going to redound to their benefit or maybe to anyone else's benefit. I remember, that these are just crass incidents when my family was still in Hungary, and my father had one particular close friend who was very high in government, and I remember when this change was a Secretary of State, would be in America, and he came over and said, something very strange is about to happen. So my father asked, what is that? Well, what it is that a very strange man, whom I wouldn't trust with anything, is going to come to our country and trying to tell us how to do certain things. Well, I said, well, why do you have to invite him? Well, he's an important German, and you can't refuse them at that time because of the alliance. So, all right, who is that? Well, his name is Adolf Eichmann. And I said, well, yeah, he's very active in a very unpleasant organization, namely the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP. I like to bring that forward because let's say, Marxist, socialist elements seem to once again have grown more numerous and more loud, and the result in the world right now, and the result of that is that they forget the fact that Adolf Hitler was a socialist, and that it was in all of their documents, all of their publicity, NSDAP. In fact, it was the only one of these questionable political parties at that time that kept that name. And I think about the only person who brought it up now and then, because he was incredibly sharp, was Winston Churchill. He said, "Don't you know that Hitler is a socialist?" Maybe it was slightly different. Then I don't know, the Labour Party in England, but he is. And so forth. So anyway, that being the case, subsequently we found out again from that same friend of my father's that Eichmann came to my country, to Hungary, primarily to inculcate that Hungarian government, very few of whom were really Nazi sympathizers, but to inculcate them with that remaining, because the deportations to Auschwitz and other lovely places like that had already started, and so they would have to be exterminated. And it was in order to try to cut down on that extermination that great humanitarians like the Swedish diplomats who subsequently disappeared. I can't think of his name now, but you know who I mean. A street named after him in New York, who went about on his own rescuing people, mainly Jewish people who were still left over from the deportation. Well, I guess we are all in the same boat, because I don't see any of you raising your hand or engaging in some other curious gesturing. So let's say, he became aware of this and then was saving as many Jewish people and other anti-Nazi people were there, who were there and who were about to be also joining their co-religionists or friends who were being taken away, as the saying had it, to the camps. And there it was important to remember that this devilishly clever and powerful individual, Eichmann, who came to Budapest and was virtually telling the Hungarian statesmen that they have to do away with these people because they still have too many Jews. And that is when the Swedish diplomat then came in, and there were two vehicles all over Budapest. These were the car of the Apostolic Nuncio, the Pope's emissary, was one. One of the Swedish, of a person of the Swedish government, So these people were driving around with their national flags and with the sign hung up that anybody who would like to come with them and not have to go into the Nazi camps could do so. And they rescued quite a lot of good people that way. So anyway, let us say it was an indication of what the inner drive of some of these people could accomplish. And these horrible people who would take thousands and thousands of others just because of their race and their religion into death, what a terrible thing that is. And yet it was a movement of terror which went on working its terrible work for several months in the autumn of 1944, and it was very difficult to escape its claws if the advocates noticed you. So we need to keep in mind that there is a collective element and there is an individual element. And there too, the people in the Hungarian countryside, in the Hungarian government, all who were there, who resisted the pressure of Nazi Germany and its lackeys, and would not go along with these terrible actions, gives us the idea that there are really two factors involved in these matters, but people don't sufficiently recognize them. And what is that? The individual and the group, or the individual and the collective. The great danger of becoming part of an ideology without even looking at it seriously, and becoming then often an instrument of terrible things, which certainly the Nazi Germans were. That is a great danger. And why is it such a great danger, and what does it amount to? Because when the individual gives up even the possibility of his or her own judgment on certain issues, certain moral issues in the country, then we are in a demonic situation. We have given up our individual convictions, our individual view, which probably we have absorbed from our parents or even in schools or so, and we are now become the members of a group. And whatever this group and its leaders decide will be ours. And that is, of course, a very unfortunate thing. The outcomes of that are always bad. Now, where does the esoteric element come in now? Well, it comes in that unlike the exoteric ideologies, literature, newspapers, and so forth, unlike those, the esoteric has a contact, maybe even a very slight one, with his own deeper selfhood. We have to remember that inside of us, no matter whether we are 2 years old or whether we are, I almost said 200, but I don't think I will aspire to that one. But you know, considerably advanced age. These, wherever the people might be, if they are of an esoteric disposition, and especially if they receive, fortification of their character from these deeper sources, these are the ones that will resist the collective terror. Because the terrible things in various countries, whether in Stalin's Russia, whether in Hitler's Germany, wherever else, speak for the fact that from the very beginning, from the time that we are children, we should be taught and impelled to do and think and feel for ourselves as individuals. The individual soul has freedom to resist temptation. The masses of people don't have that freedom, because they are subject to currents of being propagandized into directions and the performance of deeds which otherwise they would probably never wish anything to have to do with. So we need to keep in mind that history proves, whether we go back to the Roman Empire or to the days and the land of the pharaohs, or the time of Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin, that those people who managed to hang on to themselves, or at least on what they conceived as being them, because we often think of ourselves in a way that we are really not. But to be sort of have the psychological, spiritual point of gravity of your being and of your nature inside of you. Because curiously enough, and that is where a lot of the esoteric comes in, this is one of the most important hallmarks of the esoteric human and of people who are in contact with and influenced by such. When we say to ourselves, and possibly even to others, I am I, and I will look at this and I will make up my mind. I will not do these things because they go against me, the real me. And what goes against me is not going to be performed by me. And therefore, when the propagandists come and try to persuade you to join questionable movements and eventually to lend your support to murderous political philosophies, which we have seen many of, that it is there that we have to find ourselves and give a voice to ourselves. So, how do we do that? Well, I don't know whether I can give you a good recipe for it, but let's say whatever happens in society, in the world, in the community, take a good look at it and try to approach it and prove it with your own deepest selfhood that you can touch at that time. And she said, yes, these things are there, these people teach that, these people practice that, but I am I. And if it smells fishy to me, to use a vernacular expression, I will have nothing to do with it. And the problem is that this is very seldom done, and when it is done, then often the prevailing ideologies try to undo it. So what we need is a spiritually based individualism. You know, that's another thing, the collectivists, whatever they may call themselves. They are always there trying to promote your lesser selfhood, which is the herd instinct. They want to make a herd out of you because the herd can be manipulated, the herd can be propagandized. But if you resist that, if you remain an individual, when malefic forces and malefic feelings come and try to convince you that you join them, then remain quiet and talk to your inner, hidden and yet extremely important selfhood and say, look, I know there is a wise, a kind, a compassionate self in me. And therefore, I am going to see to it that that self comes into its own in my outer life and not go the other way. And no matter how many thousands of people are running around on the street with some murderous flag or something of that sort, you have to know who you are and therefore what course you are going to take. The first is the ontological question, as we call it in philosophy, and that ontological question is really the key of the esoteric person, because the esoteric person has caught a glimpse somewhere. Maybe he was just 7 years old, maybe he was 60 years old. He caught a glimpse of, oh listen, I know who I am, and I am not what these people are trying to make me be. I am not going to go along with them, but I am going to be myself. And if you continue with that, then I think you are going to, for one thing, you are going to be in the view, in the vision of good and wise and holy people. You are going to be looked at as someone worthwhile, as someone to know, and someone to love, someone to cherish. That the answer is in the self. Now, of course, we need to keep in mind that this is the sort of thing that we, by engaging in, we jeopardize ourselves. When it is something like the Nazi regime or Stalin's horrible people, then we have to just somehow wake up from that condition wherein we are drawn into a collective. The collective is our enemy. No matter how much the advocates of the collective claim that they know what is good for us. They know how we should think, what we should do. The answer within should resound out through our various voices that is not who I am. I will seek myself and find myself. And when that happens, even to a relatively small degree, then all that is alien, all that is wrong, all that would be our downfall and the downfall of our fellow humans will take flight. It can be done, it has been done, and it should be done. But there are, of course, all kinds of ways in which one must work for that, and some of it being that one needs to resist the propaganda. And when one resists these external forces which are trying to put us into a collective cage, if we are able to do that, then we are going to be saved. And the reason that I spend so much time on this rumination is primarily because although I'm not Mr. Criswell, who was incidentally a very amusing person, but I am somebody who sometimes perceives what his fellow beings are doing. And what I perceive at the present time is not very comforting, at least not to me, because the majority of humanity, wherever we go and wherever we look, molds itself, shapes itself, moves itself into one collective or the other. Whether it is the mullahs in England or somewhere trying to mold a people away from the self-knowing and self-governing individuals that they have been, or whatever else may be going on. What we need to keep in mind constantly that we have an occult self. Occult means hidden. So it's not evident at every turn of our lives. But if we continue to look for ourselves, our real self, and if we then continue to exercise the insights, the wisdom, the compassion of that interior self on our outer life, then we will be all right. If people talk about moral laws and all of that, where do the moral law come from? Well, of course, there are many books from Babylon on to now here, which are laws that have been written down by, or claims to be written down by a probably self-knowing individual. And these are the things that are in the book of Genesis, the 10 commandments and others. But no matter what outer code we may be sympathetic to, keep remembering that the judge, the commander, the head of state, the king, is inside of us. And if you devote some attention to it, and this I can say with some assurance, if you devote some energy to it, then by giving very frequent attention to your innermost self, your outer personality will change itself, will mold itself in a different form, and you will more and more be governed by the eternal law. We can use that term. Buddha used it, others used it, but this is the law which is written in golden tablets inside of yourself, and which is always with you, and which from time to time you have to dust off, and then you will know how to live. So the great and important issue is that we must have our own we must climb our own individual Mount Sinai. And there, in the burning bush of life, something will talk to us. Something will tell us how to live. Something will tell us how to comport ourselves, how to deal particularly with our fellow humans. And if we then have the perspicacity to listen to that, then all shall be well. But of course, there are temptations, and these temptations come from the mass of humanity. It's not so much that there is one devil with a pointed antlers on his head and comes to us and tells us what to do or what not to do. But there is something powerful, something incredible, something more than human that will speak to us, not from the burning bush on the hill, but from the burning bush inside of ourselves. And if we listen, and if we follow the advice, then we will be all right. Now, you have to be clever too. I mean, I won't bring up the most gruesome experiences, but let's say I had a family member who was shot 3 times by Russian soldiers. And I saw him that way when I came in sitting at the table. And bleeding like anybody. And yet, I said, remain quiet. This is going to pass. In some strange way, this is the will of God. And if we are cooperative and quiet with the will, then the will of the divine will take us to good places and away from this sort of thing. It was my father. was almost on death's door with these bullets. But let us say that indicates the person who can keep his own individual deific judgment, who knows what is that his judgment about actions will take him out of danger, will take him out of further temptation. And then you can go on, and by going on, you will still have a life, and perhaps a life that will have been worth saving, because we are also the saviors of our lives. One of the great reasons I feel, but of course with the old saying, I could be wrong, that people resist evil is because there is something in them already. They don't have to learn it in school. They don't have to hear it from the preacher, but something is there that, like a guardian angel, will take us by the hand and lead us over the danger. This has always been the case, and this is the heart of the esoteric method. This is the great magic, to overcome the resistances and to be ourselves. And with that, we spread the good of selfhood, the good of the higher self that we have. It is there, but it needs to be awakened. It is there, and we should not allow it to be covered up by anything else. And this is absolutely in the center, if you look at it, of the message of the esoteric, what we call the esoteric tradition. There are some people, like the great Madame Blavatsky, who could gather the fragments of all the ancient traditions together and to get the message from them, which way to go, what to do, and how to be herself, and how to teach others to be herself. Now, my title for this discussion was a little different, because it was supposed to deal with the future. What is the future of the esoteric tradition? If humans begin to learn how to become and to remain themselves, if they find their real self as a living, acting, cooperating entity that is here for a great purpose, then yes, then we are moving toward a good future, a good individual future, which in turn will guarantee us a good collective future. So keep remembering that we are ourselves, and we will cultivate that we have a teacher, a judge, a caretaker inside of us. And the more we know that, and the more we refer to it, and the more we thank it when it inspires us in the right way, the better things will go for us. Now, the more people will do that, the better it will go for everyone. Because what humanity needs is an awakening to its true selfhood, which is done individually, but which can be aided collectively. And this was the essence of the alternative, the occult tradition at the end of the 19th century. And there too, It was there, it was told, Madame Blavatsky told them, others told them, but of course the collective draw of a collectivized selfishness, a collectivized evil is always there, and we have to know how to defend ourselves. We have to be both, if we know something about that sort of thing, we have to be both Michael the Archangel and, let's say, Gabriel the Messenger. Because if we carry the message of purity, of goodness, of good intentions, no matter what happens, and we continue to remember that it is located within us, then we cannot go wrong. And then the sword will be handed to us, like the sword of Saint Michael, and we will be able to defend ourselves for the intrusion of what the inimical forces may be. I have known people who have done that, and their mere presence moved others to tears of joy. It could happen with us, and it only has to do with the relationship that we have with ourselves. Of course, if we then also seek the company of good and supportive people, that's also the best. But we have within us already a miracle worker, a wonder, a guide for the future, and it will take us into the future, and then all, as the particular lady, English lady mystic said, then all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. When we are well with our other higher self, when we know how to shake the hand of that higher self, which was proclaimed right in the very first writings of Madame Blavatsky and others. If we can do that, then things will go well. They cannot go any other way but well, because we are, and that of course is the deepest secret, and I'll conclude on that, the deepest secret which is most often forgotten, has been most often forgotten, that inside of us there is a being, which in ancient days would have been called a god or a goddess. Something very good, something very wise, something very compassionate, something that never leaves us, but which can work freely only if we let it, and that is what will save us. And that is perhaps why in Christendom the image of freedom, the image of liberation was assigned to a Jewish man born as a boy in Bethlehem. But he knew that he and the powers that he represents are inside everyone else. And he touched people, and all of a sudden they knew. This also can be done to us. And the Gautama, the Buddha, the same. These were people in whom their own ineffable greatness awakened, and once it awakens, it is victorious. My favorite old Latin hymn that we used to sing in school and so on, Christus vincit, Christus regnat, Christus imperat. Christ is victorious. Christ shall rule. Christ shall be the leader. And that Christ is our own deeper self, our own authentic self. We are all saviors and helpers of the world if we find the seed of light, the seed of transformation within ourselves and exercise it as it was intended to do. I know this was somewhat of a sermon, and you pardon me because I'm also a preacher, but I tried not to preach too much of it. But let me say that if I'm obviously personally at the end of the road. It cannot be otherwise. And therefore it is of great individual and personal interest to me as to what is to be done in the time left. And it has come to me like a thunderbolt only a couple of days ago that what we need to do is to become ourselves, to be ourselves, and our self, our true self, will become victorious. And with each victory will be greater and will help more, because one victorious person, one victorious soul is the liberator and the savior of many. It has always been that way, and even in this world full of mechanical things and computers and this, that, and the other thing, there it is. You can hear it in the music of Bach and of Mozart. You can see it in all the greatness that has manifested. You can see it in Gautama the Buddha walking down from the north of India, heading for the Nagas who then inspired him. It is everywhere, because if we are in touch with that inside of ourselves, then we are in touch what we need to be in touch with. May all the powers that are and be here and help us with that, because help we can use. Individual responsibility does not mean no help, but it is precisely what attracts the help. So may the help come to all, and may we be liberated, inspired, and led forward on the road that leads to eternity.